So fair warning, everyone, I will be asking for a good bit of interaction today via both the chat and the polls. Feel free to ask questions via the chat and if we prompt you on the microphone as well. So the first thing we're going to do is I have a poll question that I would like to launch for everyone. And from the list of feelings, pick three or up to three that you have about AI? Um, we did make the response to this question anonymous, so I'm not going to know what you picked. And if I missed a feeling and you're comfortable sharing it, feel free to put it in the chat. We're just trying to get a sense of where folks are at right now who are here in terms of how they're feeling about generative AI. Um, so the question will let you pick more than three. We're hoping you'll pick at least no more than three. But what are those up to three feelings that you're feeling about generative AI? Um, and we'll give it another second or two for you to let us know what you're feeling, and then I'll share it out. Oh, did somebody end it already? Maybe I did that. Let me share the results. Here you go. You can get a sense of where things stand, right? So it looks like most of us are curious, optimistic, and concerned, or like neck and neck there, which is interesting. Some resigned, skeptical, overwhelmed. One person's happy, scared, anxious. So that just gives you a little bit of a sense of where we are in terms of how we're feeling about generative AI. So I have another question here, which I'll launch that in the poll. This is just a yes, no question. And I would like to know, have you used generative AI tools for more than 15 minutes cumulatively thus far since they've become known to you? So total usage of generative AI tools, have you used them, some collection of them for more than a total of 15 minutes, or have you not really used them all that much? This is a yes, no question. Pretty straightforward. We have 18 responses and 22 people in, so give you all one more second as I move to end this poll. All right, here we go. Sharing the results. Interesting split there. So 10 folks have not used generative AI tools for more than 15 minutes. And it looks like about 9 folks have used them collectively for at least 15 minutes. So this next poll then is our last poll here. I'm gonna launch that. Have you used generative AI tools for more than an hour cumulatively? So you could have tried out a whole bunch of different ones and done some different things, and it's been more than an hour. Um, just trying to get a sense of how much user experience we have on the webinar with us here today. So of that 10 that use it for more than 15, 4 of them, it's been less than, about 4 of them have been less than an hour. So, and it sounds like there's 6 of us here who have been using some generative AI tools for more than an hour. Great. Appreciate y'all sharing that with us and just giving us some context as to, here's the results. I don't think I shared this one yet. Giving us some context as to where you're at, how you're feeling, and we'll kind of draw on that a little bit today as we go forward. So I ask those questions because I do think it's important that you engage a little bit with these tools on your own when you have time to do some exploration to better understand what they are and how they work. And this was a quote I saw a couple weeks ago from Seth Godin. I think it's a good perspective to keep in mind that sometimes these things aren't as scary once we engage with them and we spend some time working with them and understanding how they work. So to help with that a little bit, I'm gonna do a little demonstration of a generative AI tool called Adobe Firefly. And let me drop out here. Everybody can see that? Yeah, awesome. All right. So I'm gonna start with the text to image one, but one thing I want to point out is I am using my Westchester account here with Adobe. So from what I understand, folks should be able to do this with their Westchester accounts as well. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to try the text to image generator, and it needs a prompt. So I have prepared one. Kitchen design, large windows with natural light, light colors, flowers, modern furniture, skylight, modern minimalistic design. And I'm going to go ahead and hit generate, and we're going to see what comes up. And it does take a few seconds. And there we go. I got some different designs. These are generated by the AI. One of the things about Adobe Firefly here is that you have some control over different types of effects or ways in which it chooses to generate. So for example, if I wanted to do, instead of art, which is this version, maybe I want these to look more like a photo. And maybe I want them to have a warm tone. So I make some changes here and I can say, let's generate that again. And it's going to come up with some new images. This is the part where we just have to be patient while it generates. There we go. So very different look and feel. Some of those images, I'm not sure I would be able to tell at a quick look if they are real or not, or generated by a computer or not. So let's try a different example. I'll go in here and do crowd of people cross in a city street, crossing the street. Let's see what we get with something like that. And we'll wait patiently for the generator to do its thing. I did show this to a group of students the other day, and they were trying to get it to replicate me with the description that they were coming up with, and didn't do such a great job. So different feel here, but generated some different images. And if you wanted to, you could say, hey, let's run something else again. You could say refresh, give me something different. Didn't like those four that were out there. So opportunity here for you to potentially use a tool like this to generate some imagery for presentations or different things you might be needing to share from a visual image perspective, and completely generated by the AI tool. So another tool that's in this toolkit from Adobe Firefly is text effects, which I do want to point out I incorrectly said was a font generator at the last webinar, and that was my poor choice of language. But this creates text-based items based on descriptions that you give it. So I've decided to go with earthworms. And I have earthworm-based text, and I can change the text over here where it says text, where it says Firefly. I can say like teaching. We'll do that. And maybe I want to do, instead of earthworms, because that's, I don't know, little Halloween creepy for my book. Maybe I want them to be books. Let me throw that prompt in there and get a font that I can play with a little bit that has kind of that book effect. And maybe instead of books, I want to change it up to bookshelves, and we can see how that might change the way it looks. Right, so a little different effect. Lots of creative opportunities here. Plenty of ways in which you can get creative. One other tool that I want to highlight is the generative fill. And I'm not sure if I have a good picture to upload, but you can put your own image in here. So we'll do this, which is the picture outside of my window. And you can choose to erase something. So in this case, I'm going to get rid of that food truck. And then you can tell it, what do you want to create? A food truck that, and we'll see how this works. I haven't tried this particular example. We'll see what it can do. What I do think this is better for is, oh, that's a fascinating looking food truck. So as you can tell, not always a robust setup. Sometimes it puts things in weird places. I did try this out with my headshot, and erased the suit I was wearing and told me to make me into a hockey player, and that turned out fascinating. So Adobe Firefly for image-based generative AI. It's an opportunity there for you to check that out. It gives you a little taste for something that's different from some of the text-based ones that we have heard about.
Just have a quick question.
Yes,
Can I?
Margaret.
Yeah, I was just my issue really, I'm fascinated with everything, but it's really how to get into Adobe Firefly. Do you mind just going back to the basic on?
For something like that, I would be happy to show you that, Margaret, one-on-one. And for anyone else who might have that same question, I would say reach out to your instructional designer for something like that, and
No,
we'd be
no, it's
happy.
just I'm sorry, it's just where you are now and how did you get into that? It wasn't anything significant.
Oh, again, I would say reach out to your instructional designer, but if you just Google Adobe Firefly, it'll get you in the right direction.
Oh, okay.
So,
Thank you.
yep. And I do have a demonstration video that we'll link in the slides that we'll provide that shows some of what I went over with some different selections. So, all right, now it's time for the main event. The reason we're here, we're right on schedule. We're going to spend some time talking about learning activities and artificial intelligence. So we're going to try to think about and discuss how we can or cannot incorporate AI tools into learning activities. So we're going to think about where it might make sense to use these tools in our instructional practices and where it might not make sense. So we in the TLC always like to start when we're talking about learning activities with objectives and aligning those objectives to the actions that we take in a course. And we typically use Bloom's taxonomy for something like that. And so I found this Bloom's taxonomy chart from Oregon State University eCampus to be helpful when it comes to thinking about what we're doing in our course and AI tools. As you can see with the light shaded triangle on the chart, that AI tools are going to have more of an impact with those skills that are lower order thinking skills, as opposed to the higher order thinking skills on Bloom's taxonomy. And one of the kind of key takeaways I'm hoping you'll walk away with today is that generative AI tools may provide opportunities to help you push students into doing more of the higher order thinking skills work a little faster than you might have been able to do in the past. And if you notice at the very top here on the create level, the AI's impact there is not as substantive. AI tools don't really create new understandings or new information, in that they're creating things based off of the data that has come into their systems, which has already been created. So with that in mind, this is a quote that our supervisor, Naomi Nyanungo, has on her dry erase board in her office right now. And I also want to bring this up because we had some conversation with folks at the beginning of the semester at a training session where we collected some of their concerns about generative AI. And one of the things that we heard is a concern about, is this going to take our jobs or not? And I don't believe that AI is a risk right now to take away our jobs, because teaching is such a creative profession. We're never operating under the same circumstances. Our students are always changing. Our disciplines are changing. The context we operate in is changing. I do think generative AI tools will have an impact, but I think they're not going to take away from the work that we do. So, as I mentioned, those AI tools are most likely going to be disruptive to those lower order thinking components of our courses. And I would say that that is just a continuation and maybe a little bit of an acceleration of the ways in which technologies have been slowly chipping away at some of those elements. So as we start to think about how we can bring AI tools into our teaching practice, I think it's always good to revisit those key foundational components of your course. I was on a webinar through Quality Matters recently where a version of this slide was presented. And I thought it would be a helpful question for you all to consider as we move into this discussion. So a couple things here about those bullet points. What are those structural basics of your course as they relate to your discipline that students really need to have a grasp of and understand? And what are the key content areas of your discipline, particularly as it relates to the course that you're teaching? The magic words term, I like this. It's a way to describe key vocabulary for your discipline that generative AI may struggle to define with the nuance that's required. And the presenter at the time was a legal scholar and gave some examples of legal terms, which generative AI would look at without that nuanced understanding. And so it's important for students to know what those terms are and how those terms work in the discipline. And if they tried to put them into an AI tool, they might not get back that nuanced understanding. The research tools piece, I thought this was really interesting, that we work on ways to teach your students what those research tools are in your discipline that will allow them to confirm or verify information that comes from a generative AI tool. That's still going to be a very crucial or critical skill for students to figure out, this thing that I got from an AI, is it accurate? Is it helpful? Is it useful? The research tools from your discipline are going to help with that. And then also decision-making tools are those ways of thinking specific to your discipline. How can you work to teach those things? So I'm going to take a minute now to be quiet and let you jot down a few notes to yourself around this question and those key points. You do not need to share that with us, but if you want the public accountability, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll certainly comment on it. So I'm going to be quiet now for about a minute so that you can write some thoughts down. All right, so it's been about a minute, and Carol and Cheryl, thanks for sharing your thoughts there right in the chat on some of the ways in which some of that key crucial components to your course and your discipline. And BG, thanks too for doing that as well. Appreciate that. All right, so learning activities are where we're focused on here for the rest of today. And those are what students do to gain knowledge and practice applying said knowledge. Learning activities are not usually assessments. And for the purposes of today, we really don't want to think about assessment. That's next month's webinar. Madison's going to do all sorts of fun stuff with that. Today is more about how are you helping students practice or learn content and information? Like, are they doing problems? Are they reading things? Are they listening to things? What are those ways, those activities that you get students to gain content knowledge and apply that content and those skills? So take a second here and think of something that you do in your course that's a learning activity and put it in the chat. What is something that you do in your course that is a learning activity? Put it in the chat. Physical assessment skills, peer editing, great examples. One from nursing, one from, I'm guessing, a writing course or an English course. It's because that's where Mary is. Peer review, Yannick. Debate activities in class, excellent. Nursing skills, small group work, summarizing and discoursing course content, awesome, awesome. Creating and revising examples, excellent. Y'all are doing fabulous. All right, so the reason I asked you to do this, to come up with something So you have something in mind here for this next activity, some learning activity that you do that you can kind of ask these questions about. So I'm going to give us about 2 minutes of silence again for you to consider these 3 questions. Again, you can jot down ideas for yourself, or you can put them in the chat if you're willing to share. But think about, for that activity, why does it matter? Why should students invest their time to do it? And what are students gaining from that activity? All right, 2 minutes. Ready, set, go. One more minute. Go, Paul and Dan. Thank you both for sharing some of your thought process there with us. Publicly appreciate that. Thanks for engaging in that activity. I really like these questions. It's just a way to to get us to think about the things that we're asking students to do, right? How can it help us, like, explain to them why this is important, why they should be spending time on it, and what they're going to benefit from going through that process. So now, with that in mind, let's consider this additional AI question, right? If students were to use AI for that activity or part of that activity, would it disrupt your goals for student learning? If yes, think about, in what ways would that be disruptive? And if no, what is it about that activity that prevents AI from disrupting it? So I'll give about a minute or so for you to think about that. Go ahead. All right, Dan, that's a great little nuance there. Um, so there might be some disruption depending on how students approach it, but if you did a little tweak to it, you already cited something we've put out into the world there, Dan, about, if they critiqued the response, then maybe they'd be staying in the lane that you want them to be in and still, like, gaining that skill that you were hoping for them to pick up. Yeah, hands-on demonstration is not going to be really impacted by AI. I would agree with that. Like they have to be able to physically demonstrate. Um, and Suzanne, yes, says meeting in small groups, sharing ideas that would be used when students become teachers. Liam, that's a great question there that I think you should like take to your instructional designer and spend a half an hour like hashing out and thinking through. We're good at asking questions and kind of probing things a little bit. If we have time, Liam, we might dive into that a little bit. So good thinking all. And one of the challenges when we work with AI tools, as we think about learning activities, is everybody's in different contexts. Everybody's teaching things a little bit differently. For example, nurses with physical skills, you're not going to see quite the same impact on something like that you might see in a writing course where the chat GPT could write a whole essay for students if it was prompted correctly. And so everybody's context is a little different. So we're trying to give you just some ways to think about it. But one thing I do want to say, and this is from Ethan Mollick, who's a professor at Penn and pretty engaged in generative AI. He feels pretty strongly that almost every assignment at every level can be done, at least in part, by AI in some capacity. And so we do want to be thinking about, how would AI impact an assignment? I do also want to take this opportunity to point out that AI writing outputs, the text generated items really cannot be reliably detected at this point. And even if you think you as a person who's been evaluating writing for a long time from college students, you may be able to pick out some bad AI writing, some use by students who didn't do a particularly good job of masking it. But I'm sure you're not going to be able to pick out all of it as it goes forward. So we just want to be attentive to that as we're thinking about the types of things that we're doing. So apologies to those of you who were at the writing workshop at the start of the semester, as some of this is similar, but thus far I have not found a better framework for thinking about the ways in which AI tools can augment or support our work in teaching. So we're going to practice with these use ideas, which is the first column there: mentor, tutor, coach, teammate, student, simulator, and tool. But I want to provide one example from the last row where students could use AI as a tool. So how would you feel if a student used an AI tool to generate a study guide for themselves to help them prepare for a test you might be holding in your course? In that instance, they might be like, here's all the things that we learned. Can you generate some practice questions for me? And then the student has that and they can work through those questions as a method of preparing for your examination. And maybe even to go back to the nursing example, to ask the AI to like give them a simulated experience where they have to apply some of those physical school skills. The AI could kind of pose the question and then they would go and maybe practice that skill. And then the AI could say something along the lines of like, okay, now what happens if this happens? And then they would have to think through those scenarios. And I'm seeing some folks kind of saying, hey, you'd be okay with that if the student used that to generate resources to help them engage. And I think what we like about that idea is that it's the student using it as a mechanism to help them still do the work of the studying process that still is the learning. They're not trying to circumvent their learning. They're trying to kind of accelerate their learning in some respects. BG, that's a great comment, and I'll just leave it at that. I would love it too, right? So I'm going to take you through a series of AI activities that most of them should be familiar if you've read our TLC AI guide that we put out at the beginning of the semester, the toolkit. There's a couple new ones that I've sprinkled in there, but for each one, I want to see if we can identify, is it an example of mentoring, tutoring, coaching, teammate, student, simulator, or tool? So feedback provider. We ask students to put their work into an AI tool and ask for some feedback about it. They wrote an essay, throw it in there and say, what might you change? What grammar mistakes am I making? How could this be improved? They could do that potentially as a structured thing for your course. They could do that independently. Which of those items there, is this an example of mentoring, tutoring, coaching, teammate, student, simulator, or tool? What do you think? Put it in the chat. This use of AI in an instructional setting for a learning activity. What do we think it is? Is it an example where the AI is providing feedback? Is it an example where the AI is providing direct instruction? Is it an example where the AI is prompting them to be metacognitive? Is it acting like a teammate? Is it a student is the AI a student that your student is teaching? Is it a simulator providing tool, mentor, okay, so we're getting tool and mentor. That would probably be where I would be sitting. Mentor is probably a good idea. All right, let's try another one. You enhance the think, pair, share. So you put students in pairs, you ask them to respond to a question, they come up with their response, then they submit their idea to an AI and say, what do you think? Or maybe they ask a question of an AI tool, and then the students can look at what they came up with and what the AI came up with, and they have another example that they could share with the class. Cheryl thinks that's an example of a teammate. I could see that. A mentor potentially, coach, depending on how you approach it, asking, kind of prompting students with some metacognition. Okay. Good. All right, let's go to another one. Grading the AI. Students take something that an AI created and provide a grade with feedback on how well that product meets a set of criteria. So like just using the nursing example, the AI could generate a response to a scenario. And now your nurses have to look at that over and say, you know, like, are they following best practices? Are they going through the proper steps? Are they accounting for all the variables? That would be an example of that fits in a nursing standpoint. Dan, I might make sure they're still doing it in pairs. I don't know that I'd want them just talking to the AI. Here's a variation on this grade the AI idea too. Have two different generative AI tools write a paper with the exact same prompt and then kind of compare those responses and grade them. Simulator coach, simulator tool. Okay. All right, let's go for another example here. I like this one I'm a big Karen Costa fan. She just always got good things to say. So trying to get the students to write or create something better than the AI would come up with. So they create their product, then an AI generated response, and they do some comparison to see, did I do a better job here or not? Are my steps for a sequence of a process I need to do better than what the AI could come up with? Was my outline for a paper better than the outline that the AI could come up with? And what I like about some of these examples, it's forcing students to do that critical analysis, that evaluation of the AI output. And depending on how you structure the activity can kind of start to show them how AI isn't always a great thing to use. Sometimes it comes up with some real garbage. I know early on when I ran something and was like, oh, it can give me article citations. And then I started looking up those articles and realized really quickly they're just made up. The AI tool generated fake citations. So excellent. I'm seeing some more guesses in here. Coach, simulator tool. I would say those are all good examples here. You could ask the AI to provide unlimited number of application examples, case study ideas, and then they can compare them. So maybe taking an idea and putting it in some different contexts, because you could ask a generative AI tool to be like, give students a situation that's in this context and then create one that's in this context. And then students have to kind of look and see how the AI is applying that concept across those different contexts. I think that's an interesting way to approach it. Just even for you as an instructor, like when you try to come up with different examples of things that from a teaching perspective, this could be helpful for you. All right, let's go to the next one here. The AI could serve as the other half of a debate. So Dan, I'd be fascinated in some of the like philosophical contexts if there would be a way to like try to debate philosophy with the AI bot to see like how it approaches it, and then actually have students like try to analyze some of that. That could be a fascinating little activity. Um, and a fun little alternative for something like this is that you can ask the AI to put it into like rap battle form, or to do it from like Shakespearean style or something like that. Like you could have some fun with this particular type of usage, and that could be the case too for some um, other activities that are out there. I'm loving these continued attempts to place these in those different usages. That's great. All right, here's another activity: solution ranking. AI generates 3 solutions, and then the students have to rank them from best to worst. You could add into this activity by asking students to come up with a 4th solution and then reorder the explanations. Another activity type that you could incorporate within your learning activities. And this gets back to the feedback, so I'll give you the answer on this one. Having students use some sort of AI tool to generate slides, and then they have to review and improve them, and then they keep notes on what was improved and why. And this is similar to a writing style activity where students might do the same thing. I've one more after this one, if I remember correctly. I'm excited about the idea of having students ask AI tools to come up with personalized learning plans for them, where they say, I'm this type of student, I'm learning about this type of thing. What are the steps I should take to get better at understanding X, Y, and Z? And then it can generate a plan for them. So a possible activity is for students to engage in that process and then do some analysis of like, was that effective? Was that helpful? Liam, you can get into Microsoft's Bing through your Westchester account. You have to use the Edge browser, and if you want to, you can sign up for ChatGPT's free version. Although you can get the ChatGPT model through Bing as well, so you don't know that you need to come up with that. I have talked to IT, and they're kind of digging into a little bit about how they can provide some information about AI tools to the larger community. Both what's already connected to some of our things and also what else might be out there, but I don't have any sort of timeline on when they might be communicating anything about that. And the last one I have here is full incorporation, which we've shared before, where you have students try to use the AI as much as possible in an activity. All right, so your activity that you mentioned early on, where we took, does it fit into any of these categories, right? Are students doing one of these things with that activity that you mentioned? Is there an opportunity for them to be providing feedback or getting feedback? Is it a spot where they're engaged in direct instruction? Are they engaging in metacognition? And if so, that creates a connection for you about where you might be able to incorporate AI or how AI might come into that activity. So it's a way to make some connection there between what you are thinking about doing and how AI can be supportive or not supportive, depending on your goals. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I want to make sure we have a few minutes for conversation. So you can read that quote later. We already touched on this. One thing I do want to just briefly go over is if you are going to create some prompts within a generative AI tool, this is a good little framework for you to kind of come up with some good prompts. So the first thing you do is you give the AI some context about who it's replicating. So I'm a college professor, I'm a marketing writer, and I would like you to make this thing, make it like this. First, do this step, then revise it, then do this step, is an example of this 1, 2, 3 process, right? So you give it some context about who it is. You give it clear instructions on what you need. If you can, you throw some examples in there, and then you give it steps to work through. This is a nice little way to engage with. And if we step back a little further, if you want to use some generative AI within your teaching settings, set some direction for students. Kind of, here's the goal, here's what we're going to do with it. Work out that prompt that needs to go in there. Have students assess the output that they got. Maybe bring in their own work to it, or pull out the good parts from the AI. And then they do that final editing to produce that well-written product. In this case, it was a document. So let me take you through the example of a study guide, right? So for students, you're going to make a study guide to prepare for your upcoming test. That's kind of setting the direction. Then students have to come up with the prompt. What have we covered so far that's going to be on the test? Bring that into a prompt that they submit to the AI tool. The AI tool spits back a study guide. They now have to look at it, right? Is this an effective study guide? Is this going to help me prepare? What are the good questions? What are the bad questions? So they might pull out the good questions, and then they have to fill in what's missing with some of their own work, right? So, or they go back to the AI and prompt it again to get new questions around the areas that it didn't do such a good job with. And they bring all that together into a final product then that they can utilize. That would be an example here of this SPACE framework of how you can bring a generative AI tool into the instructional process. All right, discussion time. Covered a lot of different kind of little ways, some different questions. If you have questions, sorry, let me start that again. Covered some different ways to think about learning activities. Went through some different versions of activities, some prompting frameworks. What questions do you have about AI and learning activity spaces? Either put them in the chat, or if you'd like to signal with the hand raise, I can call on you and you can speak, and we'll use this last 15 minutes or so to talk about some of this. Mary, go for it.
So I have to admit, I teach writing courses. I'm an English professor, but I still am having problems mentally with thinking about how AI does make mistakes. So like generating sources. And so how do we get around the knowledge that it's going to make mistakes, and then we're having students do activities with it? Now, I love all the creative ideas you said, but even with something like the study guide, or having it write paragraphs about things, what do you think we should do about that problem? Because that's the part I have the biggest issue with, the errors that it does make and the false information it provides.
Yeah. So I actually did the study guide activity this semester with students, and we collectively as a class had come up with kind of the big picture topics, and they generated guides on their own, but then they came together as small groups and looked at their study guides and had that conversation about which parts are the best to pull out, so that they could kind of collectively have that conversation about like, hey, that question doesn't seem to be that strong based on what we've gone over in class and what we've read. And then they were in groups of 4. They each came with a study guide, and then the product for the group out of that was a single study guide of like the best quality they could make. So in that sense, they had that opportunity to use each other's expertise to kind of highlight like, maybe that question's not as good as it should be. And what I liked about that activity in that instance is they got to see the AI in action, how it may not always be the strongest in a fairly not high stakes way. So at least with that example, we created some things in place to help them do some of that analysis together. Now, if everyone in the group still picked a bad question, well, that's going to happen. But it at least gave them some of that opportunity. I don't know that I'm answering your question 100%, but that at least is my experience.
Well, no, it kind of is, because what you're saying is based on prior knowledge, what they had already learned in the class, and then using the tool that way. So what do we do when it's not prior knowledge? And it's going to be errors. What would you suggest on that? Because I love the study guide idea you just described. That's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge is you're not going to know necessarily where the errors are going to be until they've generated something, because it's a unique generation every time. And so who's going to do that analysis or that review? And if students are going to learn to use these tools in some capacity, they're going to have to figure out how to analyze it and how to do that critical analysis. So where will they go to check it? what is the strategy or the technique we can teach them to do that research to figure out if this is accurate or not. Did Mary just, oh, there she is. She just put her hand down. So that's the best I got. If anybody has other thoughts, like now's the time to chime in. But that would probably be how I'm thinking about it. Gopal, did you have a question? Because you had your hand up.
Yeah, mine was related to what Mary asked is when the group puts its heads together, then the result is going to be good because somebody is going to know what is the right way to pose the question and what the right answer is. But my concern is what Mary mentioned is in terms of individuals create their own questions because they have different learning modalities and the techniques which they use. Some of them look at the questions, try to find other questions. Some of them go to Course Hero and find the questions. If it is posted there, bring it over. Some of them create Quizlets and so on and so forth. So how is an individual student being able to probably able to generate the questions, but how to identify the accuracy of the answers or even the question, the way it is posed, and be confident about it, except post facto, meaning after the examination, they say, okay, it worked or it didn't work. And I would hate for the students to find out that it didn't work for them for that particular examination.
Yeah. I mean, there is always a little bit of a risk if they're creating their own materials, even before AI, that they were doing poor questions, right? But the risk here is if we say, oh, you can go use this, generate some questions, and then it's not helpful, it's not accurate. So what's the process in place to help check? I don't have an answer for you, Gopal. Anybody have thoughts here?
My only thought is you have to have like that check as part of the process, like built into it. I mean, this isn't quite the same activity, but I did have a in my research methods class. It's a writing emphasis course that I'm teaching right now. We used one of the generative text tools to have it create an abstract. I mean, the students were also supposed to create abstracts for an article they'd read, but we in class on the screen had ChatGPT do it, and then we which, as you all have mentioned, sometimes the sources it spit out like direct quotes and page numbers, and so the students just there in real time looked it up in the article to see if it was correct, and it wasn't. So I think whatever the process is, you just have to have that as you have to have the check as part of the step, which I think still engages the critical thinking and I think it is kind of still higher order thinking if you're including that. It's not, I'm still figuring this stuff out, obviously.
Cheryl.
And I know that's hard to get students. I'm sorry, just one final thought of students, they want to take the shortcut, but making sure that it's not possible to take the shortcut, I guess.
As we're thinking about this, and I'll get to you in a second, Cheryl.
Yeah.
One of the things that folks had talked about, at least early on in a lot of what I was reading, was that the accountability for students when they're generating stuff from AI, that one of the key points is that they are responsible for its accuracy, and that you hold them to that standard a little harder than you might when it was something that they were doing with other tools or themselves. Because if they're going to use the AI tool, they have to be accountable for that hallucination piece that comes in there. And I think that at least is connected to what we're talking about here. Cheryl, you wanted to say something?
I just want to comment what a burden it will be for faculty to like delve in and actually really see if the references or citations in a paper and the quotes are on page 7 of blah, blah, blah article. I just think the burden is huge when you're, you've got 25 term papers coming in or 30 term papers coming in. To go to that level of scrutiny seems overwhelming. Because usually, some of it's in good faith, right? We can't check every single citation reference in every kid's paper always, but wow. That's all I have to say is wow.
Yeah, and I agree with that completely. And I think when Tom was defining the difference between learning activities and assessments was really important. I think assessments are much scarier to me than just kind of experimenting with it and doing some engagement activities with it. Absolutely.
So Carol and BG in the chat kind of mentioned how they've appreciated the way to think about this, like from a little bit more of a critical thinking perspective. And my initial reactions, I think, were similar, like, oh my gosh, this could have some real impact on teaching. But as I've gotten into it more and have spent more time actually using the tools, the thought process you have to generate a prompt to get a good output is actually good thinking in and of itself, and trying to think through like, okay, what do I need structurally? How is this put together? And then like, it's typically a lot of times when it generates something for me, it doesn't generate it what I was hoping for. And so then I have to go back and tell it how to revise it and clean it up. And I still have to know what I'm looking for in order to get that finished product. So I like that thinking process that it forces me to engage in. And then a lot of these activities are forcing students to do that critical analysis, which is that higher order thinking skill that we really like. And I didn't know what to think of taking students through that study guide process, but I really liked the way it forced them to be iterative around the topics in a way that they thought was like, oh, look, I'm cheating the system a little bit. I'm getting it to generate the study guide for me, when in fact they were doing exactly what I wanted them to do, which was generate a study guide for themselves and do that thinking about what do they need to include. And it just sped the process up a little bit and got them into the studying part a little faster than if they had to come up with all those questions on their own. So for me, that's some pieces of, I like hearing and seeing that my thinking is in alignment with some other folks here who are smarter than me. So Mary, I like that idea too. And I know some journals have systems that check your references when you submit to them. So like this, there's got to be a system out there that can look this stuff up. Other thoughts or questions in the last 5 minutes or so? So I already caught some of it in the chat, but if you want to throw anything you learned today in there, what'd you pick up today? What made today useful? I'd love to hear that. Your instructional designer is happy to have a conversation with you about generative AI and its specific impacts in your course context. We can sit down for half an hour and just ask you some questions, hear what you're thinking, talk about how you might want to tweak things. You can do that at any time. We're always happy to help you think that through. If nobody has any other questions, I can be like, thanks for being here, and have a wonderful Friday, and go Phillies.
Thank you very much. This is very helpful.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.